So we have looked at Plato's dialogue Ion in the previous video, and we found this notion that Socrates wants to investigate, that namely this IH tau, Ion's Homer techne. And we found something kind of quirky about it, that it works essentially on when Homer and Hesiod, for example, said the same thing on the same subject. And so it applies to both Homer and Hesiod. Okay, and remember, this whole thing of Ion's Homer technique was getting behind the written text or just merely the spoken thing to grasp the meaning behind it, right? And then the other side of the technique was the performative side. Okay, well, Socrates gets Ion to agree that with respect to agreement, the Homer techne applies beyond Homer. It's not just this narrow focus on Homer, contrary to when Ion began saying, oh, I only do Homer, nothing else, right? And it's like, okay, I do Homer, and he said, provided that they say the same thing about the same subject. Okay, so I've opened up my Homer techne a little bit. And Socrates is like, oh, you got, okay, you opened up a little bit. Let's see if it opens up even more. Because you're saying that the Homer techne applies to Hesiod in a very, shall we say, a kind of a narrow, when they narrowly agree. So, but you're still saying it applies to Hesiod and not Homer. So, or in addition to Homer, I should say. What about disagreement? So, and then he brings up the subject of divination, which is like prediction or prophecy. And the specialists of divination would be like a diviner, which is a prophet, right? Okay, and of course that kind of sounds and feels like somebody, a rhapsode, right? Who's being inspired or something. Getting a little bit ahead of myself, but somebody who is seeing beyond, right? Seeing beyond just what's here, because after all, a diviner might have been very similar, as a rhapsode might look at the written text or whatever and then see what's beyond. A diviner also would look at, let's say, I don't know, something like the way plants grow in a certain way and see beyond, right? See the meaning. Oh, the plants grew in that perfect way, or the stars are aligned and the planets are aligned in that certain way, and then sees beyond. Well, here's what it really means. So a diviner is kind of in the same game as a rhapsode, whereas the rhapsode does it with respect to a human product like poetry and then goes up and tries to infer what's behind it. A diviner is kind of like the natural equivalent. Well, I look at nature and see what's being told to us beyond or through the script of nature. Okay, so it kind of makes sense that Plato brings this kind of a subject up. So let's say now the subject is divination. Homer and Hesiod could, let's say they agree, they both say the same thing on divination. Well, we've had that. The Homer techne applies to Hesiod as well. But what about they disagree? And Homer says something A about divination, and Hesiod says something different B about divination. And then Socrates says, okay, what about when you consider all of this? Who's going to be better at handling all that? You, Ion, or somebody who is a diviner, like, right? Who's somebody who's a prophet? And Ion replies, well, I guess a diviner would be better with all of this when you put it that way. And Socrates says, okay, sure. Now let's suppose that you, Ion, we'll make you a diviner and you're able to handle agreement. Wouldn't you also be able to explain disagreement? But remember, it's agreement on a subject. Subject is D. Agreement on a subject. Disagreement on a subject. So we'll call this kind of our narrow disagreement. You'll see why in a minute. But so we're narrowly disagreeing because we're talking about the same subject, but we're saying the poets are saying different things about the same subject. So that's our narrow. Would you be able to, if you can explain the agreement on this subject, could you not also explain the disagreement? And Ion says, yeah, I guess so. He could have contested it, but he said, no, yeah, sure. If I can handle the agreement on the subject as a diviner, I guess I would be able to handle the disagreement. So in other words, Socrates is driving that if you have a subject X, whatever it happens to be, and you can explain agreement on it, you can explain what's going on when people agree, you should be also to explain what's going on when people don't agree. right? So there's this natural connection. Is it really natural? Does it have presuppositions? Yeah, we'll unpack those, and Socrates will talk about that a little later. But he's just sort of relating that. Think about, agreement and disagreement are kind of two sides of the same coin, right? So if you understand the agreement, you would understand disagreement. You may accidentally not understand disagreement, but if you really thought through the agreement, you would have the capacity to understand the disagreement. It would be a little odd to say that you have an understanding of agreement. Would it be odd? Well, it seems intuitively odd that you could have an understanding of when people agree on something and have no idea what to say when they disagree. That's the main point that's going on here. This will be unpacked a little more later on. So, if we think about it, then Ion's Homer Techne only handles agreement? Really? That seems weird. What could this really be if it only handles it? And then Socrates wants to broaden this. He says, okay, I've got you on a little bit of, it seems odd that you can only handle this, shall we say, very narrow agreement with your Homer Techne. You can't handle what you should be able to handle as a narrow disagreement. But moreover, Homer talks about a lot of different subjects: war, love, chariot building, gods, etc., etc. And so do other poets. And so if you're really able to interpret and think, you should be able to handle agreement and disagreement also with respect to different subjects. So when they're saying similar things about different things and different things about different things, you should be able to handle all that as well. So in other words, you can handle the broad stuff as well. Narrow when they're saying the same thing in agreements and disagreements, or sorry, when they're talking about the same area or subject, and when they're also talking about different ones. So narrow and broad, different subjects. So you should be able to handle all that. Well, in that sense, Ion is deeply puzzled, right? He's kind of puzzled. It's like, okay, all of a sudden now I thought I was a Homer specialist, and now you've kind of turned me into a generalist. In other words, I can handle all the poets, but he's puzzled by this, right? And clearly most of us would be, right? If you thought of yourself as a specialist and you thought, no, I just do Homer, I don't do the other stuff. We're used to people talking like that. I mean, certainly today, there's lots of people that are Homer specialists, but they wouldn't claim to be a specialist in Hesiod. So what's going on here? Well, there's a number of things going on, and we'll unpack some of them later. But Homer says that, I'm really puzzled by this notion. And what I can't figure it out is I'm like, how is this going to work, right? Well, we're going to continue in the next video by pursuing this a little further. So stay tuned.